Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling host JP John Poz with me today. Very special returning guest. He was the former creative assistant down for FCW for Dusty Rhodes, and of course he is a podcaster and wrestling historian, Mr. Rob Naylor. Rob, welcome. How you doing?
Hey, thank you for the laudatory lead in there. Good to be here. Hope everyone had a great holiday or is having happy holidays. I know it's not New Year's quite yet, but had a good one. Got to go visit family in Pennsylvania, so that was very nice. And now I am back in San Antonio, Texas.
Wow, nice. How's San Antonio? I love San Antonio.
I really like the city a lot too. I find people are very polite here and very nice. The weather I could really do without, but it's been good so far. I've been down here for a couple of years now, and good times. I wish the wrestling scene was like it used to be. Like I actually read in like the mid '80s, there were actually 4 different companies running San Antonio regularly, and it's like wow. I mean, there's still wrestling here. I just haven't really sought it out too much, but it used to be a pretty big deal back in the day.
Wow, really? Who the heck was running 4 different towns? That's awesome.
Fritz, Texas All Star would come in here because I think Joe Blanchard's outfit turned into Texas All Star, if I'm not mistaken. Although that might have been Houston. I get it kind of confused myself. I get Paul Bosch in Houston and Joe Blanchard in San Antonio. You think now I live here, it'd be a little easier for me, but I still get it confused way too much. But I think Texas All Star was Houston, but I think they'd still run here sometimes. And then I forget who else would be running here, but I do remember it was said like, 4 different companies are trying to run San Antonio, and none were doing that great at the time in the mid '80s. But it still was a deal. And I'd like to do more history on the history of San Antonio wrestling. There was a place called the Junction where they would do the television, and I just found that last year, and I took a picture of it. I was like, "Oh my god, the Junction!" It's just this unassuming, row of like buildings, but it still has like the sign, the Junction, and I think it might be a flea market or something. I could be wrong there. I don't know, but I love the history, and I know Shawn Michaels' wrestling school used to be down here. I haven't seen what building that was because I think it's even less assuming than the Junction. But San Antonio, big history. And I don't even know. I'd been to Texas just like one time before I moved down here, so it's kind of wild. But big old state. I will be happier to get back to a coast of some sort sooner than later, but I've enjoyed my little stay here in San Antonio for sure.
I love those buildings that are totally you're like, wow, that was an old wrestling building? Like, wow, that's weird. You know what I mean? Like you have no idea. Like, wow, they had wrestling there forever. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
this junction's about a 1-story, like 1.5-story building. It's just like a long building, and I guess that's where they would film the TV. So I got to do more looking up on that, but pretty interesting. And like I always like any famous wrestling town I go to, I always like to go to just the antiques places because you never know what you're gonna find. There could be like
Yes.
a North American tile or something laying down, or old newspapers and magazines. And I've not found anything here yet, but it does intrigue me to go seek out some more of those places.
I love that. Now, speaking of like old school cool wrestling and kind of looking back at some of the greater eras, what's going on with the podcast game? What are you podcasting on lately?
Oh, I do Squares, not Squares. I do what the hell we call it? I should know the name. It's called Center Stage Chronicles, and it's with my friend Charles, or Loss, online on Twitter, and then Chris Zellner, and we basically just look at WCW. I had thought I've been watching a lot of older wrestling anyway, and I just said, you know what? I would love to really just break everything down with Chris and Loss, who's a good friend of mine. And I'm like, the three of us just know so much minutia about the NWA and WCW. And I also looked at it as like, wow, 1989, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95 were all very different years, oftentimes with different management, different bookers, and just a different cast of characters because things just changed so much back in those days. And I'm like, boy, we'd have a lot of fun talking about that. And then Zellner's like, let's do it. I was like, all right. So we do that every 3 weeks or so, and we're having a lot of fun doing it. And people think I get cranky sometimes because we read old Observers, and I just want to
Hmm.
pull my hair out sometimes. But God bless Dave and the Observer. It is a wonderful historical document, and it's. I'm glad it exists, and there's all that history there and everything. But it's a trip. I enjoy just think it, I'm sure you also probably had like VCR tapes and you taped your wrestling probably every week as a kid. That's what I did, and I would just religiously watch Worldwide Wrestling or NWA Pro. We didn't have TBS and TNT until a little bit later, but I would just watch and watch and watch and watch. So I have like Minotaur squashes and like just every other person, like when Conan came through in 1990 and 91 and Buddy Landell and the whole gang and Terry Taylor, just all the usual suspects. And I just like talking about all of it with those guys, and we've been having a lot of fun with it so far. So, it's a good project. And Loss does something called Wrestling Playlists, which is a Substack, which I wasn't even too familiar with until I joined up on his. But he just basically goes through wrestling history every day and does fun little write-ups on different matches in that week in wrestling. And I've been producing some music videos for his projects. So I have watched so much 1985 wrestling in the last year because I basically will go through like 100 to 200 matches, and I don't watch them. I glean them, and I glean through. I pick different ideas and spots, and we just slap on a 1980s tune to it and do like a 2 to 4 minute music video for the month of 1985. So we're going on October now, and it is a lot of fun because I got into pro wrestling in July 1985. So it's basically revisiting like the origin of my fandom, and it's a lot of fun.
Nice. I love that. I love old school wrestling, especially that era. I feel like that's the best. And even when you talk about 90 and 91, I love that. That's like kind of like my jam too. I love that era.
Yeah, because like Dusty was in WWF, so then you either had not Jim Crockett. I guess it was it was Ole. But then before Ole, you had Ric Flair. Then you had the booking committee, and then after Ole was I think Watts, and then after Watts, K. Allen Fry, and the whole thing, and then Bischoff and Kevin Sullivan and Dusty and the whole gang, and it was a lot of fun, and it was, to me, there was a lot more transactions. There was always new people on TV. Like anytime there'd be a debuting wrestler, I'd be very excited, whether they got vignettes or not. Vignettes were good for like WB did a lot of the vignettes. And then Dusty was doing vignettes too at some point. But, I always like just seeing different faces and new wrestlers. And I just kind of laugh when I see people. I'm like, oh my God, who's that? What's their backstory? I don't understand. It's like, just stick with them and you'll figure it out sooner than later. It's not rocket science, but yeah.
When you look at 91 too, like Sullivan was even in there in 91, a part of some of like the committee sometimes. I know he wrestled obviously a bit in 91 too, but I always look at that era. I'm like, man, I used to rent so many tapes we had a local video store for whatever reason. And it was always that era, WWF too, but the WCW was for some reason so much that I remember I was like breaking the tape. Like it was beginning to become like worn out. But I remember
what state did you grow up in again?
New Jersey.
Oh, wow. So you were lucky because I was over in like Coal Region, Pennsylvania. And for whatever reason, we'd have some, but like we never got like the 1987 War Games tape with the Cage and the Road Warriors and all those guys on it. We never got that one. We would get like Wrestle War 91. We'd get Starrcade 90. We'd get some ICW Pafo tapes, which is just random. And again, you said it best. A mom and pop video store. You never knew what you were going to get. You just knew there'd be wrestling tapes and you'd get all your best of the WWFs, which were fine. But then when you could see other wrestling, like I remember the first Japanese wrestling I saw was a World Pro Wrestling, and it had like Dr. Death and Inoki and Dick Murdoch and Jimmy Snuka on the front. I was like, oh, what? So like I watched that, and when you're that age, like any new wrestling is just like bold and new and exciting, and you just kind of take it all in. But yeah, that's the thing. When you're getting them tapes, it just really reinvigorates your excitement for all of it. And Kevin Sullivan, you're right. He was with the he was with the One Man Gang in 1991. But like prior to that, he was around. He was doing Sullivan's Saloon. He had like a little thing on the Pro and on Worldwide sometimes. And he was a vital component to all of it. And I know he passed away this year, unfortunately. But Kevin Sullivan, I'm watching so much of his stuff from 1984 and 85 when he was the Prince of Darkness, and he had his whole gang of Maya Singh and God, I can't even the
Purple
Lock,
Haze.
Purple Haze and Molokai, and he had the fake Dusty Rhodes with Mike Davis. There's just so much good shit, and he had he had the golden spike, and he's golden spiking Mulligan and putting a hex on the Mulligan name and the families of the Rhodes and Mulligans. And it just cracks me up since I know the generations of the Mulligans and Rhodes. I'm like, oh my God. If I was a little kid in that family, I need to ask. But like, imagine being like a young kid watching wrestling at that time if you weren't smartened up. Like, oh my God, the devil is putting a hex on our family. What is going on?
You'd be a little perturbed, like, what the hell's wrong with this guy?
Yeah, because I remember Bray, when he was coming up with his whole deal, like I remember he came to me, he's like, I want to put an X on the top of my forehead like Kevin Sullivan did in like 1985. I was like, oh, that's awesome. And then I think he maybe did it for a house show or two at FCW, but yeah, I just remember I just always liked that link of the Rotunda family and the Mulligan family and Rhodes and Kevin Sullivan and just their battles and wars over the years in wrestling.
Does he realize that's blasphemy though? Because his family was the one that was hexed. Does he?
It's even better, right?
Did he realize?
Even better.
Yeah.
He is the best. He was so good. Like he loved really just pushing it with that character too. Because I guess Spivey had stopped by. I wasn't there that day or wasn't there that hour when he dropped in, but I guess Wyndham and Spivey had a nice conversation, and there you go. But yeah, it's because there were so many like Cape Fear. There was and he was a big Rob Zombie. What's that movie? House of a Thousand Corpses, the Firefly family. He was on to that. So like there was like a lot of more religious undertones when we put this thing together. We're just kind of looking at the P's and Q's of the situation. And ultimately it kind of morphed into a little bit something different. But I remember I pitched like an Asiatic spike. Like you hold the opponent by the scruff of the neck and you hit him with the taped thumb with the Asiatic spike, and then you slowly help them fall to the mat. I said they call it the act of contrition, and he liked that. But then everyone's like, "Are you out of your mind?" I'm like, no, like we're not gonna do that. But he was more religious based, and then obviously Lafayette, Louisiana, was where he based the whole character out of, and things like that. But it was just a trip because he had such a fertile mind, and he just loved to really put a lot of thought into everything he was doing. And then later on with all the different stuff he did, I wasn't even always watching all the time, but whether people liked it or didn't like it, it certainly was out there, to say the very least.
Now, the interesting thing to me of that, and my favorite Bray Wyatt gimmick was the Waylon Mercy gimmick. Like when he originally came with the Wyatt family, isn't that so interesting though? Like Waylon Mercy in WWF in '95 and like that era, that where he's there basically, that mid-90s period. It's not like one of those things where fans were like, wow, that gimmick was so awesome. It's like very obscure to a lot of fans, I feel like, right? I mean, to me, I was like, that's the coolest gimmick. I remember, watching like Superstars or whatever and seeing like, wow, this is so interesting. But of course, they never did anything with him. Isn't that interesting though? Like that's
I think his back was shot, so they kind of had him there, and he only lasted a couple months. But you're right. In May and June of '95, they'd start those vignettes for Waylon Mercy, and he's either squashing a worm or he's at a dock or like he's just doing something, and they have that eerie music in the background. It was very subtle, but I remember he had that. He put a little cross on his head too, a little like thin one, and you know what I mean, and all that stuff. And I was a teenager and it creeped me out. I was like, what is this?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I thought it was really good. And one of the last texts I sent Wyndham was there was a Pro Wrestling Illustrated article where basically it's like Mike Rotunda, Danny Spivey is not Barry Windham. Like I said it to him. I go, I can't help but read this article and think of you, because it's literally Spivey who took Wyndham's place because he had blonde hair in the U.S. Express, your dad, and like your Uncle Barry, who's your first name Wyndham. It was the craziest thing. It was just that whole family and the Spivey Wyndham Rotundo connection is wild. Because I was watching some Spivey and Stan Hansen earlier today, because they were a hell of a team in All Japan in the early '90s. And Spivey, a lot of wrestlers who wrestled Spivey kind of claimed, oh, he just guzzled you, and he was kind of hard to work with. But that was the big man style in those days. You know what I mean? Like if you were a big guy, you protected your size, and you kind of hauled off on people. And if they hit you and it wasn't hard enough, you weren't really going to register what they did. So You know, I never was in the ring with him, so maybe it's valid. But you know what I mean. It's just he's a big tough dude. I mean, tough outside the ring too, from all the stories.
Oh my God, yeah, there's amazing stories, and I just thought that was like, man, it's so interesting. Like the Waylon Mercy gimmick, like that's what he picked, like to follow, and it like worked perfectly because I feel like people weren't as familiar with it. It's just like one of those gimmicks where it's like Sean O'Hare in the 2000s, like man, that gimmick should have gotten more life, or they should have done more. That's exactly what it was with Waylon Mercy. I thought too, like what a cool gimmick, and like they didn't do anything with it, but obviously Bray was watching.
Yeah, Nathan Jones too. Like I remember Nathan Jones. Obviously, he had like the greatest look of any professional wrestler in history. But I remember they were doing these little vignettes. He's like, I was in jail. He was incarcerated this long, and it was kind of like scary. Like, what's this guy's backstory? What's his deal? And then he shows up and like he makes, you know, Sid Vicious look like Kendall Windham in the 80s by comparing like this jack big guy, you know, and you're like,
Yep.
oh, what's his deal? And I remember they put him with Shannon Moore. And I remember Shannon Moore had like the greatest match he could have possibly had to get Nathan Jones's look, power, and everything else over. I was like, oh my God, this guy's going to be just a gigantic star. And then, like, I think a couple months later, I think he was gone. But I was very impressed at least how that's the thing with the I call them wimpy matches, but the enhancement matches. There's a real value in those back in the day. Because even if you were somewhat green or rough around the edges, like the right enhancement wrestler could really make you a star. I mean, look at Zeus. Like Zeus is someone in wrestling who I look back on now with such more appreciation than I did as a kid, because they basically took a big tough actor and they taught him the most minimal amount about professional wrestling, and he only ever had like 2 or 3 matches tops, and he drew a ton of money. Like
Yep.
all my friends
Yep.
from grade school, my old friend that I saw this Christmas for the first time in years, he beat his chest and started yelling "Beefcake Barber" like Zeus would, and I just laughed. I'm like, out of everyone knows, like, oh, Rob loves wrestling. Out of all the wrestlers, the hundreds of thousands of them I probably watched, the one that my buddy from high school picked was Zeus. So he made an impression on a lot of people.
Man, I was just talking to remember Sunny Beach, the old
Oh yeah, sure.
Sandy Beach, WWF, UWF's Sunny Beach. He was mentioning Zeus, and he was like, "Man," he goes, "he was a great draw for them. I wish he could have done more." And I was like, "Actually, I thought the same thing because when I was a kid, obviously I hated Zeus because I was a Hulkamaniac, but I was like, man, it's like this guy's like scary. But I actually really want to see them like fight. I wanted then Survivor Series, and then the match in the movie with No Holds Barred. It's just he was the draw for me anyway. I just was like, man, this guy looks like a freak show. He's awesome."
And then he had that last match with Abdullah in WWC for Carlos Colon in Puerto Rico. And it's like, how did that get put together? Like, it's always fascinating that, like, in 1990 or 91, one of those years, he came back and had a match at the stadium for the Anniversario 90 or 91, I believe. And I think it was 91. I think it was the one where the Rougeos wrestled the Medics, and like it was the wildest crowd I've ever seen. Like trash and paper and cans and anything that wasn't tied down was just being thrown at Jacques and Remo and Rougeau. I was like, oh my Lord. But yeah, that's the thing with that WWE Network and Peacock and anything else they're going to call it these days. Boy, I'd love to see some of that WWC. I think they own the Puerto Rican footage, and I really enjoy watching a lot of that, because to me, where I'm at with watching wrestling in my life, because I've watched entirely too much of it for too long, I really love atmosphere in what I'm watching. And when I go back and watch older wrestling, it really appeals to me at this stage of the game, because I really like how loud and animated a lot of those crowds in Oklahoma or Texas or the Carolinas were in the 80s, and Puerto Rico. It's absolutely the same on a lot of those old 80s and 90s tapes. And even when WWF or WWE went there, that amazing crowd that they had for the Bad Bunny match. So
It is awesome, like when a good crowd makes the show. Like obviously a show could be good, but when the crowd is good and the crowd is hype, it just makes the show that much better. And like that Puerto Rico show, like you're saying with Bad Bunny, that just like made that show. Cody, I don't know if you saw it last year, him versus AJ in France, they were like
Yes.
nuts. So it's like, man, that made the show. I love those type of crowds. Those are the best. Attitude Era-esque crowds.
Yes, and sometimes even with the indies, when I used to go to Ring of Honor, when you walk into the Manhattan Center in 2006, you're like, okay, like it's on. Like this is going to, I could feel it in the air. There was an energy, and it was always just such a gigantic is like, it was like 900 people, like 100,100 people or less, but it was just so, everyone was just so into it. And then you'd go to a Ring of Honor show in Edison, New Jersey, and nothing against the fine folks of Edison, but they had that little country club that they'd run in.
Yeah,
And it was
yeah.
just
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it was just a different atmosphere. It was a little quieter. And I like those shows. I went to them, but you just knew that it wasn't going to be the same vibe as it was in Manhattan for whatever reason. So that always intrigues me. Like Nassau Coliseum recently had that WWE show, the main event, I guess it was, and those fans were going crazy. And that was historically always like, oh God, Nassau Coliseum. Oh no, like that's the deadest crowd in the wrestling game, and they're back, So the idea that it's just going to be a bunch of fans who aren't really into things is going to be a decades long curse. That's not necessarily true, I suppose. But the good venue is always a very, very good thing.
I did love at the old New Yorker hotel and
Yep.
Grand Ballroom. Remember the New Yorker, the Manhattan Mayhem show? That was awesome. Low Key Homicide versus Jay and Samoa Joe in the main event. That was awesome. Like just that crowd was just amped.
Yes, and it was impromptu. Like
how
I remember,
tight were we squeezed in that building? Jeez.
Yeah, I was there too, and I just remember being like, that was one of those shows. It's like it's like an old Eddie Graham package show where like there was the technical match with Nigel and Colt. There was another Japanese style match with like Black Tiger, who was Rocky Romero, and James Gibson. There was Jack Evans and Roderick doing their tag team, specialist thing. There was Punk and Jimmy Rave in a bloody match, and then you had Joe against Lethal in what could be characterized as like the teacher versus student. Then you bring in the tough guy New Yorkers with Key and Homicide to do an impromptu main event. Like and then Special K, they imploded and had a match. God, how I remember all this, but then they had a match too. So like it was like a good. Do you remember in WCW in '97? I think it was Bash at the Beach, but there was like a Jericho Ultimo. There was a Lucha 6-man. Rodman was in that main event against Luger and the Giant with Hogan. Then you had Flair against Piper. And I just look at and Chono and Muto against the Steiners. And that's another one of those shows where it checks the box off for every type of fan. And those are always my favorite shows because it's just something different in every match.
The buffet, yeah, big time.
Yep.
That's so true. WCW used to do that. ROH a lot of the times would do that too, obviously, which was awesome. Love that style, yeah. And I feel like ROH in that era, oh my God, those were the best. Those were the days.
How was it almost 20 years ago? Like
I know, holy
like, oh
crap.
my God, I gotta go buy a cane. That's unbelievable how time flies. But yeah, 20 years ago. But like 2004 to 2007 and 2008 to a degree. But that was like my favorite Ring of Honor years for sure.
Yeah, I'd say probably towards the end of 03 till about 08. And that was just killing it, especially 04. Just killing it.
Now, did you go to any of the ones in Elizabeth, New Jersey at the Rexplex? We might have discussed this. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. That building was awesome. Like that was such a fun building to begin with. When you're walking in there, you're like, oh my God, what the hell is this? Some kind of fun house.
Is there like a skate park at the back? Like what the
skate park type
place?
Thing? Yeah. And like who in the hell knows? And then they did something called Hellfest, and I guess the Bad Luck Riot 13, like not a hardcore guy over here, so I apologize. But like they were on and they destroyed the place and threw a pig's head in the crowd. Like everyone it was just nuts. There's footage of it. And I think that was the end of the Rexplex. I think it went out of business after that. So way to go, guys.
I drive by it all the time and I always think
near the IKEA, or there was an IKEA. I remember.
Yep. I always drive and I always think to myself, man, somebody should run a wrestling show over here. Like somebody needs to run a show. It's just an awesome venue, and you can get people from like all over. People coming in from the city, right down the turnpike there. So easy to get to for everybody. I just feel like somebody should run there.
Yeah, if this coal cracker in his early 20s from Pennsylvania could have found it with MapQuest printed out directions, I'm sure everyone could find it now, and it would be a wonderful venue because it was easy to find. Like once you saw that IKEA, it was like, okay, there it is. So
Yes, it's just I don't know. To me, those were some of the best shows too because you had Punk versus Joe there. You had so much awesome stuff. Low key returning there, just really really awesome cards. Just
yeah,
always stacked.
Briscoes. Yeah, you're right. That was Cactus Jack came back to one of those, and they had Ebasan dress up as Cactus Jack against Samoa Joe on one of those shows.
Yes.
A lot of time, man. It's so crazy. There's so much talent, and all of us that went to them, we would bang the drum online, like, "No, it's awesome! Like these guys are the future." And everyone's like, "Shut up!" Like Batista rules. These guys are never gonna. And like they basically all slowly took over the business, and for better or worse, depending on what fan you are of wrestling. But they all went in there and changed it and made it to what it kind of is today, and intermixed with all the other top names and stars, and everyone did really good. Even the behind the scenes people,
Yeah,
it's
look at Gabe.
wild when you look back. Yeah, Gabe and Adam Pierce and the whole bunch. So good for everybody that got involved in wrestling for the love of it. Because again, that's something that you got to say to people too. Back in those days, in 2003 to 2006, like I'm sure a lot of people had aspirations that they wanted to make it in wrestling, but I really don't know if everyone. It seems to me, and I'm talking for people that I'm putting words in people's mouths now, and I really don't know what the thought process is. It seems to me though that I do think a lot of people just have the assumption they're eventually going to get signed now, whereas in those days it was such a pipe dream that like they were really just doing it for the love of the game. I feel most of those wrestlers and that whole crew.
Yeah, because remember when Paul London got signed? I mean, they was such a big deal because it was like, oh my God, they signed
Right.
somebody. And then, they
Yep.
had that whole thing for him. It was just like, wow, at that point, it was WWE basically. I mean, you could go to TNA, but it's not really, getting signed, I guess, so to speak. I mean,
Yeah.
you want to go to WWE, you get signed and you make it real big. And it was like, wow, London, and then kind of nobody for a while. It was very strange at that era. WWE only came in town.
Yeah, and then when Punk went, and then when Joe went to TNA, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, I think everything all of us little indie fans love, I think it's just gonna go away. And then like it really didn't, like it
Yeah.
really didn't until like probably the 2010s. But like it stuck around, and it wasn't like some indie wrestler sweepstakes. Like I would have assumed it would have been after Joe and Punk went up to the two different federations and did pretty well.
To me, I know some people online were getting on me about this because I said this on one of my shows. They said WWE in like the early 2000s, well actually the whole 2000s, I hated it. I thought it sucked. Probably after 2002, I was like, I didn't like it, except for I liked Eddie, I liked Benoit, and there was like obviously Hogan's return here and there and just a few little things that I kind of liked, but mostly the 2000s I didn't really like. In the Ruthless Aggression era, I wasn't really that into. Batista and Cena didn't do it for me. I thought Edge stunk. Orton I liked, but then he never really got the big push. I was like, thank God for Ring of Honor, because I can go to these shows, I can enjoy these guys. I love AJ Styles, I love Danielson, I love Joe, I love Punk, love the Briscoes. I don't know, I feel like ROH saved my fandom for a while.
Yeah, I think I agree. In indie wrestling, because I look like I'm the same. Like after 2004 or 5, I stopped watching Raw. Like even when they called me for the developmental gig in 2011, like, do you have product knowledge? And I'm thinking like I could give you the history of the Missouri title, and I could probably tell you Nick Bockwinkel's social security card number, but like I don't know who the last 3 WWE champions were. Like I wasn't watching. Like I had a tertiary thought process about some of the stuff that was going on, but I really didn't know. So then when I got down there, I just had to like head down and follow everything and get everyone's names and watch the main roster show and try to watch Raw and SmackDown and see what they were doing and how we could integrate the people we had. But like, yeah, I'm with you. Like it was tough times, and only more recently, I was an AEW complete diehard for a while, and I still wish them well. Got buds there and friends, and good for them, and same with WWE. it's very combative online now, so I don't really talk about either on my Twitter because you don't really win doing it.
Yes.
I just don't like to. I don't like the when we were younger. I guess we can go on there and talk about WCW or WWE and ECW and find like-minded folk and just enjoy it, and there wouldn't be like someone just jumping in yelling at us and stuff. So like I'm too old for that stuff, so I'm saying whatever. So I don't really tweet too much about either one, but I enjoy it, and WWE is really. They're doing a lot of stuff that I really enjoy these days, which is crazy. So they've kind of hooked me back in, and I put on X, Twitter, whatever today. I just said for the longest time I liked the excessive professional wrestling, like much like you, like we were watching Beefcake and Valentine on an indie show, or King Kong Bundy, and it's that same style in the 90s and the 80s, and then you get the Japanese tapes and ECW, and then like the indies of the 2000s was just excess, and I'm not saying they just were high spots and no psychology or anything, but it was just an excessive form of wrestling entertainment. And then PWG and the whole thing. And then the 2010s was more excess. And I loved all of it. But now I'm at the point where I'm pulling back and like, I want to see like a finishing move hit and it be the end of a match. And I'm not like, if anyone else doesn't want to see that, cool. I'm not fighting with people over. I just know what I want to see now. Cause like, I think I've seen like the near fall thing, like 1, 2 near fall, shock face. Oh my God, zoom in. And it's like, the new near fall to me is when you get a 3 count on a finishing move, because like it's so rare that's the new near fall. The near fall is now when there's actually a fall taken. Like it's wild just how things have gone. But then again, people like it and it gets crowd reactions and whatever. So again, I'm not over here. I'm on the porch shaking my fist, the clowns. But it's just what I like. I like slower stuff. I like it when things mean more. And I do like it when they kind of all dial it back a little bit, and finishers are finishers and more basics are applied. But again, who knows? In 5 years, I could be going back to CZW and jumping off balconies through flame retardant tables with thumbtacks and all this other stuff. Who knows? But for now, I just like, give me Uncle Elmer and Adrian Adonis from WrestleMania 2, and I'm good.
Yeah, hell yeah. Damn right. Did you see, by the way, Hell in a Cell? Did you see Punk versus McIntyre in the Hell in a Cell?
Yeah, I really liked it. I'm happy. The feud was good. They had an injury to work through, and that's kind of hard to keep things going and keep fan investment when you have something like that. But I'm glad they got to do their thing and they built to the big match. And I'm glad the big match was largely well received and everyone, got through that. And now it's kind of fun when after a big feud like that, what happens next? Who do they splinter off and fight next? And I guess Drew and Sammy kind of went at it. And now Rollins and Punk. But, I'm intrigued to see where it all goes. And WrestleMania season's coming up. And it's usually the most fun time of year when you're a WWE fan, I suppose. So that'll be interesting to see where everyone ends up. The different marriages of feuds and things of that nature, how that's all going to go.
They got a lot of options, a lot of top guys, a lot of good stuff. And it's funny, like I was reading lists of like people's favorite matches, and obviously it's always different. And I think Sports Illustrated had a list out, and Meltzer had his, star ratings list. So, it was categorized, I guess, highest to lowest or whatever, 6 stars to 4 stars, whatever. However he did it, they were like looking at it, and I was like, wow, I don't know, I guess my maybe sentiments towards some matches have changed because he put Ospreay and Danielson, or I guess a lot of people put Ospreay Danielson was their match of the year, and maybe years ago I would have said yes, and I was, but I had Hell in a Cell as my favorite match, and then I had Cody versus Roman at WrestleMania. So I don't know, maybe I'm changing, maybe I'm becoming a sports entertainment guy over a wrestling guy now.
Yeah, I had those two very high also. One sentimentally just because Punk's my buddy and I want to see him do well, so I'm always happy for my friends. But like the Cody thing, like I really like the bells and whistles, the dog and pony show, if you will, with the finish of that match, and it's just the scale and just how it's just so mainstream, and it to me it just checked all the boxes, and I really enjoyed that. And Will Ospreay was my favorite wrestler for so many years, and I get why everyone loves it. I think when someone hits a spot and then someone just hits another spot back and forth, I find that is something that happens in a lot of the matches. And I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just not for me. You know what I mean? The flavors of ice cream
Yep.
thing. But, it's too much. To me, it all just kind of becomes homogenous with all the other matches. And again, guess what? You got an audience full of people loving it. You know what I mean? Losing their minds. My thing would always be I would just ensure that he has my top belt and he goes on last. So then he could do his match and it'll be at the end of the show and everyone lose their minds and be like, Because I feel if you put him on any other spot on a show, the rest of the show somewhat, I don't want to say suffers. That's a little dramatic, but it's harder, I feel, for the rest of the show if he's on early, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
And again, there's a place like people love it, and I loved it for a long time, so I get it. But I it's like, okay, so remember when we were ECW fans, right? So like, how did I wanted to just check my brain back to those days? Like, every match has blood, a table, there's just near falls, high spots, crazy things. And I guess I just didn't look at it the same. You know what I mean? Like in those days, I just loved it. It was like, yes, more is more. Woo! This is great. Sabu, RBD, and tables and flaming tables and chair shots and Mike Awesome and Masato Tanaka and Crazy and Tajiri. And you had that whole cast of characters. And I never would have been like, well, you see, you can't have this on after this. But like, I do feel in watching some of the more recent pay-per-views, I do feel that some things would have a little more oomph if they didn't follow the fireworks show, if you will. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to say in a nice way.
I love Ospreay. He's awesome, and I would rank a ton of his matches high. But I think just the emotional investment in the storylines with Punk and McIntyre and Cody and Roman is why I would rank them higher. Because I feel like AEW hasn't been doing enough to get you interested. Even the tournament they just did, that wasn't even the main event of the pay-per-view, which is odd, right? If you're bumping up this tournament. So I was like, man, they didn't even do that right. Even though the finals, apparently, I didn't see the match, but apparently the match was awesome because Okada's a god. So I don't know. They just don't do things the right way. They kind of get you excited.
It's one of those things, John, where I look at wrestling, how can I put it? Like, I feel like they're in like the growing pains era of they're doing things like there was times in ECW where, god dang it, I was going to watch ECW. I was going to watch some of those latter day ECW pay-per-views in the Hammerstein with Kid Cash and the whole gang and Easy Money. And I was going to love it. It didn't matter. I liked ECW. So I'm just going to watch it. But they weren't growing at the time. It was the end of the company. You know what I mean? And maybe they were growing as far as crowds, but it just seems like it was too far gone at that point. And I'm certainly not saying AEW is too far gone. I'm just trying to say wrestling, there's always ups and downs. Sometimes things are hot, sometimes they're not. There's so many different variables on how and why. But, they'll be back and kicking butt and it'll be fine. Because again, I'm not one of these people who's like rooting against anyone. I want everyone to do well. I'm very glad that WWE, I used to not even be able to watch because of the camera cuts and the way that some of the dialogue was on commentary. And they've really cleaned that up a lot. And that seems like something pretty basic for, to do. But I'm really happy with that. I like that they do angles where they're protecting the pile drivers as killer finish. And then I also, what are some other things they've been doing? Like, it's just, to me, it seems like the people who produce the matches there, they know what each match is to an overall card a little better. Whereas, remember in the ECW days, Paulie be like, if you can't follow it, tough stuff, because this is ECW and you just do your best in every single match, which works for ECW. But sometimes I think there has to be, there is a skill to laying out a card. You know what I mean? So, we'll see where it all goes. And there's some bright spots and obviously Kenny Omega's back and Adam Copeland is back. And I got to meet him just recently and he was very nice. Someone was shocked. Like, how'd you not? Because we weren't around. Remember, he retired in 2011. And then that's when I went to, FCW. So I just never would have been in contact. He was very nice. I reminded him that he worked Too Cold Scorpio in Wind Gap, Pennsylvania in 1998. He's like, you know what I did? He goes, I worked Flash Funk, but he's like, I'd forgotten until right now, but now I absolutely remember. He's like, I worked Too Cold Scorpio for Blaine DeSantis, Pennsylvania Championship Wrestling. But
Wow. What
yeah,
recall there? Damn.
yeah, it's a trip. It's always funny when when I was like Pennsylvania Championship Wrestling was like the proto Ring of Honor in ways, because they would fly Mike Modest out in 1998, 99, or Venom Black was like a big, he was in AAA, and eventually I forget what lucha organization he worked for, but he was like the hot luchador. Venom Black and Mr. Aguila and Super Crazy, who was Hysteria at the time, and they were just all like the luchadors, and this local promoter from Pennsylvania flew Venom in, and I was like, oh my God, this rules, So it's that thing when you're ultra nerdy about wrestling where like I was the one guy who's like, hell yeah, the hell with the heavenly bodies. Mike Modest is here.
Yes, yes.
So, again, you're as a promoter, you got to appeal to everybody, I suppose. So I was the one guy who was glad that Mike Modest got a ticket out to Pennsylvania.
This is bad too. My buddy were watching AEW. He's texting me. He's like, "What's up with this toilet paper thing for Ricochet? Like they're throwing toilet paper at him." And I was like, "Trust me, I've seen this before." I go, "When Prince Nana, who was probably his idea," I said, "when he was in this group called the Embassy, they used to, instead of streamers, they would throw toilet paper at him and Jimmy Rave." So I was like, "I'm pretty sure that they stole the idea because Swerve comes out, he starts throwing the toilet paper." So he's like, "Man," he's like, how did you know that?" I was like, "It's part of the crowd." Like, one time I caught toilet paper and we threw it at Jimmy Rave. So it's just funny. He's like, "What the hell?"
I absolutely had a bag of toilet paper on a subway once going in from Trenton, New Jersey to Manhattan. Because if you remember, the New Yorker Hotel, the last show or one of the last shows they did in there, people threw toilet paper and it hit one of those incredibly expensive and old chandeliers. And I think it even broke it. Like, for real. I remember being like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like, someone's going to get a lot of trouble. Because they had to be worth so much money. But yeah, I'm glad they brought the toilet paper back. This is one of those things like we were talking about with Waylon Mercy, where some of these things can be recycled. I usually try to say 7-year rule. 7 years. So this is way longer than 7 years, but that's actually pretty funny. I wonder if they're going to continue with it though. I mean, I guess he brought TP and they passed it out. So I guess they're not allowing people to bring TP in, which is probably a good move. But because with a company like that, whereas with Ring of Honor, who cares? Everyone bring TP in where it's fine.
Right.
But yeah.
But I was like, man, they're bringing back the old Embassy, throwing the toilet paper at the heel. I was like, this is kind of cool. I was like, bringing back some good memories here.
Oh, I remember it was even worse because that Jay Chung was such an awesome babyface character. And I remember it was Alex Shelley, Jimmy Rave, and Spanky as a 3-man team in either Morristown, New Jersey. I always forget what that's called. Apologies to Morristown. Yeah, there we go. Yep. So I remember they had her on all fours on a leash, and she was pulling a chariot of them to the ring. Mush. And I was like, oh my God, this is such heat. What a bunch of a-holes these guys are. And I forget who they wrestled that night, but that was another thing. I was like, okay, this is going to get over just because they were such, horrific bully heels. And she was such a great character. Then when she finally turned, it was such a big deal. So yeah, props to Jay Chung. That was a very underrated character in Ring of Honor from 2005 for sure.
I feel like the Embassy really got over, maybe way more than Gabe even realized that they were going to get over. I mean, that was like a super over heel group. I loved it.
Yeah, I was on the old AIM back in the days with Jimmy Rave. And in those days, he was very motivated. And in hindsight, I was such a smart, smart shit, so to speak, where I was like, oh, well, I know wrestling. But Jimmy understood that as a heel, his job was just to not do anything cool. You know what I mean? Like
Yep. Yep.
he was an amazing heel, and he's someone who I liked him then, but he's someone who now I can go back and watch tapes and really enjoy even more, and being like, wow, he really understood what he was doing. He was very good. John Walters, he caught a lot of crap from all of us little Ring of Honor fans back in the day. But John Walters was a very good heel because he was another one who I dare him to do something cool. You know what I mean? But he wasn't supposed to do anything cool. He was the heel. He's the one who takes away the cool things. So you say, boo, you suck, So in hindsight, he was better than I probably gave him credit for in the first time around. So
he was a great pure champion, though. He was a great pure champion for them.
Pure title, the pure rules.
You know who I always thought was the best in ROH? For whatever reason, I did not like him in ECW at all. But in ROH, I thought he was awesome. Steve Corino. I was like, man, he just, maybe because back then I wasn't really into the skinny, wimpy heels, but he put on some weight. He started dominating over there in Japan with Hashimoto, and then all of a sudden he comes back and he's doing like the Zabisco stalling gimmick, and he's got his own personal announcer. I thought he was the best in ROH.
Corino with Bobby Cruz announcing every world title belt, or every wrestler who ever drank alcohol before a match with CM Punk. It's like Outlaw Ron Bass, Bobby Duncombe. It's like 8 minutes long. Oh my god! And
James Fullington, aka the Sandman. Yeah.
They'd get the water out for Bobby Cruz to gargle so you can continue to speak as everyone's booing. That was so good. That's another thing I think someone has kind of brought that back, but I think Kenny's done something similar. But having your own heel ring announcer is such a good bit, and that was so good. You're right. I liked him in ECW too. I thought the last year of ECW when he would just bleed all the time, and he'd be in all those 8-mans with Sandman and good guy Tajiri on the other. No, Tajiri was bad, and he was on Carino's side, but then he had those matches with Tajiri and Jerry Lynn, and like you said, on the indies he was so good too because he put on the weight, and I'm really happy for him to have a role in wrestling that he has, because he was always a real good dude when I was around him, and good old Steve, yeah, man, he's also a Pennsylvania guy. He's like Amish country, I think, Lancaster, Lebanon area of Pennsylvania, where Adam Cole, I think, comes from too. So
I remember I interviewed him. God, it's got to be like almost 8 years ago now, but it was a while ago. I interviewed him, and I asked him about that run. And we were talking how great that run is and how awesome the feud with Homicide was. But he was saying he took like a page out of the Zabisco book of like kind of like stalling and stuff, because those fans, they just want to see action. They want to see wrestling. So what does he do? The exact opposite. He wastes time. He gets his own, announcer, which wastes more time, which takes away from the wrestling. So his psychology was like off the charts. He did not want to be over in Ring of Honor. He was great.
yeah, there was a couple of those Homicide matches which just all-time classics. There was one in Connecticut, I believe.
Oh, I was at that one. Oh man!
Oh my
slapped
god!
the taste out of his mouth. Actually, slapped the shit out of his ear.
Yeah, and the juice. And Homicide was just on a mission. Homicide in 2003 was like a force of nature. He was awesome the whole decade, but like, oh my god, in 2003, he was so good. There was great. Gusher, Julius Smokes ringside was amazing. He had the ring that was the debut of the long ring announcements. That I'm jealous you got to see that one live. I remember when I got that tape. I watched that tape like 10 times. I was like, oh my god, this is so good, and it holds up. I watched it just a couple months ago. It was outstanding.
Oh, should have been the main event that night. That we were.
Oh yeah, I know, because Key and Dan Moss. Jeez,
yeah, gets knocked out.
Joe and Punk was on that show too. Their first ever Ring of Honor match. Wow.
Yep. Loaded show. Xavier was on there. Daniels was on there. Just a loaded.
Xavier Daniels was excellent. Yes, that's an underrated bout on that show. That was a really good match. R.I.P. Xavier.
It's crazy how much good stuff was in ROH in that era. Just the best. I don't know. That's, to me, I just love it. And every Danielson title defense, when he got the title, I was just like, wow, the Brandon Lance Storm. He's beating Carino. He's beating, like, just what a fun title run.
Yep, and you got to follow the title run. That was a CZW versus ROH thing, which happened in real time. And I went to so many of those. And Then every year you'd get an import where you'd see either Kobashi or Liger or the Dragon Gate guys and Misawa. It was like you not only excitedly ran to the building. Like I lived like 3.5 hours away for a lot of these things. I didn't even have to bat an eye. I was gonna be there. I wasn't gonna miss any of those. So that was like I remember I drove I drove to Chicago to see the Ring of Honor Dragon Gate. I saw the 3/31/06 and 4/1/06 shows, and then I didn't even go to WrestleMania and drove home.
Oh my God. We used to go to so many shows. I was looking up the results. And I was like, "Oh my God, I went to that one. I went to that one. Went to that one." I was like, "Oh, that's right, Summer of Punk." I went all the way up to Long Island because I thought he was going to lose the title to randomly Jay Lethal on that show. I was like, they got to do the title change. What? Punk signed a contract in the middle of the ring. He's not even in the company anymore. What are they doing? Summer of Punk was so good.
Yeah, he was outstanding that year. That was a good time. That whole era was just unbelievable. And yeah, Carino's always one of those guys I just wish I took a road trip with. Like I'm very fortunate. I got to talk to a lot of the wrestlers I admire and hang and just discuss wrestling with them. And he'd be a fun one because I'm sure we're around the same age. And I just know that we grew up watching a lot of the same wrestling TV shows. So that alone. I remember me and Larry Sweeney, we had a show out in Pittsburgh. I was just in a car with like Larry Sweeney, Mustafa Ali, and Shima Zion, DJ Z, or I forgot, Joaquin Wild. These guys and their names every other year with these guys. So like we're in the car, and I just remember me and Sweeney in the back just breaking down Saturday Night Main Event and how like God, they'd always put the big house show match on there long past due. That was like it would be Hogan and Boss Man, but long after Hogan and Boss Man was in the arenas, and it was just like that's like the fun wrestling road trips where you just get to nerd out and break wrestling down with other people. So
definitely, and it's like Hogan Bundy a year later. Yeah,
Bundy won. I think Bundy beat him by countout.
And then they did the rematch. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, that's wild. I wish I remembered other things as well as I remember wrestling.
I know, how bad is that? Me too.
My God. What am I doing in my life? I was like, yeah, Bundy won by countout, 1988. Brian Bosworth was there. Like, what the hell? Come on, man.
Yeah, like I can't absorb like stuff for work or so whatever. I can't absorb it. But wrestling, I was like, oh yeah, Hogan versus Honky Tonk Man. I'm like, oh yeah, Ronnie Garvin as a referee. I was like, oh yeah, you just remember weird stuff.
Yep.
It is interesting, like when you go back and look like Saturday Night's Main Event. Now they're doing it again, and they're trying to get the nostalgia thing going. Like I always find like that is so interesting because it's so real. It's like, well, they put the music to Saturday Night's Main Event. Now I have to watch it. I feel like that nostalgia thing with wrestling fans, maybe even more like a key to the fandom than maybe somebody else watching another sport or something else they love. I don't know why. Like if you hit, like for instance, Saturday's Main Event, they put that song to it. I'm like, well, I was watching it. Now I'm like really intrigued. Very interesting with nostalgia in wrestling.
It's so huge for me. And then Tony got the November Rain.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
I liked it a lot. I will say, small minor, I wish they had no audio of the promos over the song. I think the same stories could have been told without any of the audio. Because remember how, like, the November Rain videos we grew up on that Tony watched, like, they would break them up. Like, Paulie would show up and say, like, a prayer or something. But it wasn't, like, a constant barrage of audio clips. But I'm happy that they've brought that back too. I think they can modify it in the future, but because I think there's this, and to their defense, they get it so much online, like, oh well, what's this all about? And please hammer us over the head with what this is. We can't follow. So I guess that's kind of what they did. They just had the audio sound bites to further tell the story with November Rain, but I just wanted to hear November Rain and watch some cool wrestling clips. So hopefully down the line they can modify it a little bit. And the video editor was great. Like, again, I couldn't have edited it as slickly as they did. I think that's what's happening here. It's the nostalgia in me. I want to see the one I saw in 1994, 95, and 96. I want to hear the song, and then eventually there's an interlude where Paulie shows up or Tommy Dreamer says something, and they go back to the song. But again, nostalgia, hell yeah. I'm glad both companies are kind of dipping the toe back in the nostalgia thing, and it's not like a dirty word. Like, well, think about this. When me and you were watching wrestling in 1990 and 91, like 91 WWF, like the Road Warriors or the Legion of Doom and the Nasty Boys and Kurt Hennig and John Tolos. They were never going to say, oh, well, John Tolos was the Golden Greek. No, he was the coach. You know what I mean? Like, it was so much. It was even, they were almost allergic to nostalgia. Like, God, let's not talk about the past. Like, this is the now. Like, this is Tugboat. This is the Texas Tornado. He was never Kerry Von Erich. So I'm glad that wrestling has loosened up a little bit, and you actually have, like, I think they gave the referees their names again, which is good. You know, they're just not like nameless, faceless people anymore. They're making strides and doing things that appeal to me, at least. I'm not saying they're doing the right things, but they're doing things that make it more entertaining for me to watch their programs every now and then.
Yeah, definitely. And hey, they brought back Jesse the Body. He was doing commentary of that.
He was
like,
bitching and moaning about the baby faces cheating, which I saw online. Like, oh my God, see, even Jesse sees it. It's like, no, that's what Jesse does. Like, guys, go on, watch some old tapes, because he'd always be bitching. And Monsoon was that way too with the referees. They need to have like an announcer these days who just complains about the officiating all the time. That would be good. There's a little ode to Gorilla Monsoon.
I don't know if your buddy Lost posted it or if it was somebody else, but it was Gorilla Monsoon every house show or every tape show. I don't know if it was it wasn't MSG, I don't think. It was definitely Prism, Philadelphia, but there's a couple arenas. Every time Terry Funk wrestled, for some reason, he like got in Monsoon's face on commentary. You could tell Monsoon like would get like annoyed because obviously it's not supposed to happen. But I was like, this is so great because the crowd would pop for Monsoon because he would stand up, but he took off the headset. You could tell like the look in his eyes, like if he was scripted or if he was supposed to happen, he would say something funny or whatever. He wouldn't get up and take his microphone off. Like, it's like, oh shit, what? Like, it was just so great. I'm like, oh, it's like whoever posted this is great because I never noticed it before. But they're like, look, throughout 1985 and 1986, every time Funk wrestled and Monsoon's at ringside, he like pokes him, like pokes the bear. I was like, wow, that is so great that somebody like realized that.
It was probably Lost because he just loves those Terry Funk enhancement matches because they're unlike anything else. He's a complete madman. He's like a Tasmanian devil. He's not doing things by the book at all. He's, like you said, taking swipes at Gorilla. And it's like, what the hell are you doing? And it's like when Pillman grabbed Bobby Heenan's jacket at the class.
Oh, God.
Like,
what the F are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, what are you doing? Like, stop. But that's, again, Pillman was on the phone with Funk a lot. So I'm sure that is a direct descendant of that kind of behavior and activity. If you're going to be a wild heel, you got to be a wild, like Kevin Sullivan, Buzz Sawyer, Terry Funk, Stan Hansen. Like, these guys were maniacs. You never knew what they were going to do. Like, God, I'm trying to think if there was anyone in my little wrestling run that was like that. There were certain people who I was like, man, I don't want to be the little interviewer for it, because sometimes like people are intense, and like if that intensity is enough to like shake you up, then they're doing something right. So I like that, and I like those scary heels of the past that you never knew what they were going to do. Macho Man attacking the Jimmy Suzuki in Memphis. He's like, here you are, you're not the wrestler of the year. What do you mean? And he just grabs the guy, and the little guy juices the little fan from Japan who's a camera person. I was like, oh my God, it's wild. Because that's another thing, guys. Anyone listening to this, go to YouTube, go to a friend with a Google Drive, find all the Macho Man Randy Savage from 1984 until 1985, including his short run in Puerto Rico, WWC. It's amazing. And Macho ruled in 86, 87 until he retired. But man, that Memphis stuff and the Puerto Rico stuff is damn exciting.
Oh, amazing. I just can't believe that Vince thought he was done in 94. Like, he had 5 good years left in him basically after that. Just crazy that Vince kind of gave up on him.
Yeah, Mach, he had a really good in-ring year in 95 and 96 and 97. Like, yeah.
Yeah, feud of the year with DDP 97.
And then I was someone who loved the eating extra protein bars,
Yes,
Macho Man
yes,
at the
yes.
end, because he was just so jacked. It's so like I call him the warlord, Randy. Like he was so jacked, and he was doing pile drivers again, and he's doing these elbow drops off the top, which were surely just breaking people's ribs. He's just like a giant bowling ball. He ruled. I love Macho Man. He's if I had to pick like a top 10 favorite wrestlers of all time, Mach is on the list for sure.
Oh God, yeah. I'm a huge Hulk guy. I always have been. He got me into wrestling, so I'm a Hulkamaniac. But I always say if he's like 1A, Savage has got to be like 1B. Just he was so good at like Hogan. Okay, maybe not the greatest worker in the world. Savage was. It's like, okay, is Hogan a great talker? Yes. Savage might have been a little bit better of a talker. Like everything you could say, Savage might have been better. Except for Hogan, obviously the push and the god of wrestling, but Savage technically wise and promo wise and charisma wise, I feel like he matched Hogan on every level. I feel like Savage may be the perfect wrestler if you really think about it.
He really is, and his first match with Hogan, I believe, was in August 1985. I think I just put it in a music video I did, but
Was that the Detroit show?
I think it was the one I watched was Prism, but there might have been one prior. But like I
Okay.
think that was around the time, and Mach actually wins by count out, and he hits him off. He grabs the belt and jumps off the top rope to the outside with the belt on Hogan, and Hogan was like big guy, big guy, big guy. We feed me big guys, big. But the guy, I believe the guy at the end of the day who drew the most money with Hulk Hogan was Randy Savage. I think that's like a factoid. I think that's an
Yes.
actual thing.
Yep.
Because, like, it's a smaller guy, but they were so perfect for each other as rivals. And Hogan could be there steady in the ring, and Randy could come to him and bounce around like the Horseman did with Dusty. And it just worked. It just worked. And they were both such wild characters. And yeah, that you're right. That's the big feud. And then Kamala drew a lot of money, like Orndorff,
Yeah.
Kamala.
Yep.
I think Big Boss Man is on the list. Quake, I think it was in the waning days of the money years of WWE, but Quake was a good Hogan opponent. But yeah, the Kamala, I go back through records, and the amount of money Kamala was drawing with Hulk Hogan in the late 86, early 87 era was crazy. That was a match people went and paid money for tickets to see, and it's an excellent match. And the ones where Orndorff is dressed up in Kim Chi's thing and interferes is my favorite. So it's a good one.
Yeah, if you look at it, it's crazy. It's like wow, and TV ratings too with Orndorff and Hogan were like through the roof, like just insane. Saturday Night's Main Event, two basically within a few months of each other. Just like the number of people watching was like 15 million, 20 million. It was just crazy with Hogan and Orndorff. Also, obviously Andre, right? He's the big one. They thought no one could draw more than Hogan and Andre, but then Hogan and Savage drew more. So pretty nuts.
Yeah, and like if you think about it, as far as I know, I think Orndorff turning on Hogan in the summer of '86. I think that was the first heel turn I ever saw in WWF, and I only started watching the year prior. But that was like the first turn. And if you think about 1986 WWF, other people might be able to. I don't think there were more than 2 or 3 bad guy turns the whole year. So the bad guy turn was done with the top wrestler with Hulk Hogan and Orndorff, and it drew a ton of money. And it's like, think of how many turns we see these days. You know what I mean? Like when you could, a challenge for all bookers would to be have a roster and challenge. I love this word, the writers or your team, your creative people, to get the most out of the people and not have to result in a turn just to do it. Like if somebody ain't getting over, I get turning them. I understand that. Like if something isn't working, pivot. I get that. But I just wish there was more of people in charge telling their people, look, let's come up with ideas. Let's come up with ways and negotiate a stronger run for our baby faces and our heels, and let's not just we should just turn them and that'll be the answer. You know what I mean? I'd like for professional wrestling as a whole to get better with that. So then you'd have the Orndorff turn on Hogan. You'd have Andre ripping the cross off Hogan and drawing 78,000. What in between there, 1,000 people at the Silverdome. You know what I mean? So, like I said, again, I'm Grandpa Granola over here. I'm not the current fan, so maybe fans like the turns. Because I remember when I was a kid and you'd read the magazines and there'd be a turn every week in Memphis. But then again, they were in that circuit every week. You had to do things like that because you were going to be back every single week. So maybe that's the new age booking philosophy with the turns. I just wish we saw less of them, and I wish when they happened, they were more impactful. That's all.
They would mean a lot more if there was less of them, for sure. I mean, it just, when you're doing them too much, and I know I always talk to Russo, and the swerve, bro, the swerve, it was just too many. You know what I mean? It kind of killed it. He just too many swerves, too many turns. I can't get into that. I like when it's few and far between.
Yeah, and then devil's advocate, it's like if you look on the wrestling we grew up on, right? So like WWF, I'm sure you got like a couple hours, or maybe 4 hours. Like you get Superstars Challenge, All American maybe if you watched on Sunday, and then Primetime maybe if we watched. That's in like 5 hours. Okay. NWA in my area, we got Worldwide, and that was it. And then in the 90s, we got the Pro or WCW New York. So we had 2 shows. It's 2 hours. Now, a lot of these companies, they've got the satellite organizations, NXT or Ring of Honor. You got the main organizations. You got all these hours of time you're committed to these partners of yours. And maybe that makes it more difficult. Again, I don't want to. It's hard for me to critique stuff when I don't know all the nuts and bolts of the intricacies of a lot of these companies. But I do think that everybody can really chill out on the turns. That's all. Like, I remember like getting so excited when there were turns as a kid on the TV shows, and it would be very few and far between. So again, if I had a wish list for 2025 for professional wrestling as a whole, not picking on anyone here, I would just try to do less turns. That's all.
It would make it more interesting because if you turn everybody, then it's not as impactful when you turn somebody, like big time. Like I have a feeling Randy Orton eventually will turn heel, and that'll be big if they don't have anybody else turn around that same period. Like hold off a little bit here.
Yeah, because like look at in this, I wasn't around, but like when I guess I was 2, but when Zbyszko turned on Bruno, like that drew that Shea Stadium crowd, and that drew probably a lot of big house show crowds. And it's like, I don't recall too many other turns on Bruno. Like if someone could name them, I'll happily accept being wrong. But I think the idea that, and it wasn't just a turn on Bruno, it was something they built up for weeks and weeks and weeks on the television program. And then ultimately it was a guy who he was the mentor of. And that just makes it even more of a viable, turn that would affect people. So yeah, like you said, just challenge the people with these shows to be a little better at, turning people. Because and even the good guy turns. Sometimes people turn good, they don't even do anything to turn good. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like that's a new thing in all of wrestling that's happened a lot. And I'm like, wait, what? And I'm sure in the history, like I don't want to be like, oh, back in my day they never did that. I'm sure back in the day they did turns where it wasn't even like, and babyface didn't even do anything. It was just good. But like, if you're gonna go through the process of turning someone good, like try to have a good tangible backstory for the reasoning on why, and it might actually work and draw ratings and money. So
funny, when I interviewed Dusty, actually it was his last ever interview with Dusty, one of the last things that I mentioned to him was his turn joining the NWO and turning on Zbyszko. And he ripped it. He said it was horrible, which it was a little bit of tongue in cheek. We're saying it's such a great turn, but he was saying it was horrible, so stupid. He doesn't even know why he did it. And he goes, actually, I know why I did it because I wanted to drop the elbow on Zbyszko. So he kind of like turned it into like something funny, but one of those things where like, why would you even turn Dusty at that point? Like too many turns.
See, I never talked to him about that, but I would have fought him on that because I effing love the turn. It's the follow-up that I thought like when he slowly unbuttoned that shirt and it was a black NWO shirt and like Spicoli bounced all over the ring. Like, oh, I loved it. And then it immediately died. But like they should have played up him and Scott, him like being a mentor to Scott Hall as a young wrestler way more. Like eventually it would have worn thin, I'm sure. But man, that thing was DOA a couple weeks into it. Unfortunately, you're right. So it's like,
Yeah, they didn't do anything good with it at all.
oh, that's classic.
I just thought it was funny. He like the only thing he thought was great about it was dropping the elbow on Sabisco.
Oh well, I found a friend of mine on one of those 90s or not 90s 2000s level WWE DVD releases. I guess one of the ones on the Bash, they had a Nikita Ric Flair match, and it had Dusty and Zbyszko in a room together doing new commentary on the match, and it was so funny for me to hear them two going back and forth because over the years you'd hear that maybe they didn't always get along,
right?
But you'd heard that about him and Terry Taylor, and you'd heard that about him and everywhere Ricky when Dusty would be there, Ricky Steamboat would usually kind of go, even though like Dusty was the booker when he was there in the 90s. But I always like when they all cohabitate and you get to see them interact, and you realize things aren't as bad as maybe they seem. But
yes, I think he just loves to mess with Zbyszko. But hey, two of my favorite commentators as far as color guys, Dusty and Larry. Maybe even Larry might even be one of my favorites.
Yeah, Larry's a classic. Larry is a classic. Like I said, my favorite thing Larry ever did, with all regards to him knocking Nick Bockwinkel out with the nunchucks on AWA in the 80s. But when he's in the ring with Elegante and Sid Vicious brings a stretcher out, he's like, "This is a man-made stretcher for you, stupid man." And he's like, "I'm Sid Vicious and I rule the world." And then they went back to Zbyszko and he's like, "Any rebuttal?" And he puts the mic up and he's like, and he puts his hand out and Zbyszko goes, "The man just said his hand rules the world. Look it." And he just moves on and they go to the commercial. I was like, oh my God, it was the funniest. So yeah, Larry, he is such a dry wit. Like, it's good.
He was in this new movie Unbreakable Bunch with, or I guess it's not that new now, but with Glacier and Luther Biggs and Haku and a bunch of Ernest Miller, a bunch of guys are in it. So I was talking to Glacier and Luther Biggs, and I says like, "Oh, I haven't talked to Larry in a long time, but I've interviewed him a few times." And I would always call him, and he would call me back, and I would purposely send it to voicemail. And Glacier and Luther Biggs was like, "Why would you do that?" And I was like, "Because I knew I was going to get an anecdote on my and I saved them. They're still on my phone of basically 30 to 60 seconds of a story. Normal people would just be like, "Hey, it's Larry, call me back." He's like, "John, I'm on the ninth green. I'm going for par." And I would love it because I love his commentary. So I'm like, every time he calls, I'm sending it to voicemail because I want like a 60-second Larry Zbyszko ism, like a story. And he's like, "Oh, I just sunk the hole here on the 18th green." I was like, "Yeah, I love Zbyszko." So I would send it to my buddy who also loves Zbyszko. He's like, "That's awesome." He's like, "That's so cool that you're getting messages from him." I was like, "I know, right?" With like a story about him golfing. I was like, "This is great."
Dude, I love that I'm currently speaking to the foremost Larry Zbyszko enthusiast in the world. This is great. I love Larry would be at some of the NXTs and FCWs, and he'd just be walking around, and he'd have like either a Hawaiian shirt. He'd be walking around, and he'd be like, "I don't even know I'm supposed to be here." like that almost oh God, what was that? Ronnie Dangerfield-esque delivery.
Yes.
Oh, he's great. He's the best. Like you said it. Like he's just a classic. He is one of a kind. Him and Lou Albano. I never got to meet Lou Albano, but Lou Albano's another one of those guys from those days. It's just a classic.
I never met Lou either. I wish I did. A friend of mine's uncle was his lawyer. I was like, "What the hell?" I was like, "How did we not meet him?" You're his lawyer. What the hell? I was like, Jesus. It's like, come on, damn it. Zbyszko, he was training, I think, was it that guy Lars Anderson, or he was training somebody right down there at some point in FCW or NXT?
He might have been. I think I was out by that point, so I don't know. But he had start coming around in like 2000. 13, and I just always remember being happy when Larry was around, because it was like he was like a fly on the wall kind of in those days. But I was always just happy that he was around, because I like it when the older wrestlers are around to talk to the younger wrestlers, especially if they have something to contribute. So I thought he was
the
good.
Game of human chess. Scott Hall, you coward jerk. Well, the best line is like, well, Hall, why don't you come over here? I'll kick your ass like I did 10 years ago.
Oh, well, I put on the music video. Scott Hall always told the story where he's like, one of the best lessons Larry ever told me was, it was Winnipeg, 1985, and I had him covered after the big bulldog, and I'm laying on him, and he goes, jump up and down like you won on 2.5. So it's like 1, 2, ding, 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 and he jumped up and down, and the place went crazy. And like, I guess it was just Larry's way of like, get the most out of this draw that we're about to have, so at least the people are excited and they can have their emotions taken down when they change it. But I always thought that was a pretty good little anecdote from Scott about Larry and his mind on making the most out of situations.
I love Zbyszko on commentary. I just was a huge WCW fan. Just loved it. Shivani was awesome. When, like we were talking about Dusty with that turn, it's so funny. Shivani, like you would think, like, I don't know, somebody just killed his cat or something. You know what I mean? Like he was like so upset. Like, Dusty turn. He's like, oh God. He's like, here we go. And the WCW Dusty turn. Like Shivani was so good when stuff like that would happen.
Yeah, because you think all the years. Like I think Dusty. I don't know if Dusty hired Tony, but like, yeah, he was part of that team. And it's like, damn, this is like the end of an era. Dusty, because he was another one who, as far as I know, he started as a heel with Dick Murdoch and the Outlaws and the whole thing. But I'd never seen him turn bad until that point. So like when he turned, I was like, oh my God. And Dusty, like he was WCW, like he was the one. Like you think about the amount of time people get to talk on those shows, the commentators, they get the most time of anyone. He was the one always hammering home WCW tradition. So when he finally turned, it's like, oof.
At Fall Brawl 96, another awesome Shivani moment when fake Sting comes out, and you're thinking like, come on, this is obviously fake Sting here. This is not really Sting. Shivani goes, well, that's the end of WCW. Sting has joined the NWO. It's like Tony, what are you? Do you have eyes? Are you paying attention? What are you talking about? I was like, that's not really Sting. And he's like, oh, and the trademark Sting moves. And like, he's like, wait a second. And then when the real Sting was like, there's Sting. Just he was so good. It was like, wow, Shivani's like depressed. He thinks Sting is in the NWO.
Having done commentary a time or two, the thing that's the greatest thing about being a commentator is you're kind of supposed to be an idiot. So, like,
yeah.
You're just supposed to just be a complete dullard and be like, well, there it is. Like another great one was Bill Mercer in 1983 when like Michael Hayes showed up at the Christmas Star Wars dressed up as Santa Claus and started beating the hell out of the Von Erichs. And he's like, I believe Santa Claus is attacked the Von Erichs, but I don't think that was Santa Claus. And it's like, oh my God, it's obviously Michael Hayes. What are you doing?
Yeah, that's great. Sometimes the announcers doing stuff like that makes it for me. It's just like so good.
No, it's the best. That wrestling was campy, particularly in the 80s. And I think we gotta have a little bit more of that back. And we're getting it in some ways, but like when it's just campy and you just know what it is, it's the best. I don't think it's the real Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Dusty would tell that story all the time about the time, because in Christmas they had Sullivan as Santa Claus. And Dusty lost the Loser Leave Town on Christmas night in Tampa or somewhere. He'd get mad at me for not knowing the exact place. But yeah, they screwed Dusty on Christmas night, and he had to leave the state of Florida so the Midnight Rider could come visit. But I just remember he's like, yeah, we got him, Robbie. He was the devil dressed as Santa Claus. I'm like, oh, Lord. I'm a huge mark for any kind of Santa Claus angle, for sure. I used to get mad when Santa Claus would be on the show and it wasn't an angle. Like WB had this thing in the 90s where they bring Santa Claus out at the end. And I was always so pissed when it wasn't like an angle. It was like legit. And like, I'm such a, how dare I? There's kids who love Santa. He's a central figure to millions. And I'm just like, it's not a heel. Like, Come on, man. What are we doing? Why is Bret Hart wearing a hat with Santa Claus? Like, are you sure that's not Mr. Hughes? Like, what's going on?
I was just watching, God, I guess it was 98 Raw or maybe late 90. No, how did it be? Yeah, maybe it was late 97. Vader dressed up as Santa stiffened the hell out of Goldust, like destroying him. I was like, this is Santa Claus. This is how it's supposed to be.
That was a good one too. Yeah, Vader Claus.
Yeah, yes. Like, I've never seen Santa hit that hard. Oh my God, it's Vader. What about Santa Claus? Remember that weird gimmick with Balls Mahoney?
Not only do I remember it, but on like Christmas Eve, I looked at my phone and I'm like, someone put Santa Claus on the timeline. So I literally Googled on Christmas Eve Santa Claus theme, and I played the Santa Claus theme music like 5 times. So it was like that. I'm sure it was a Jim Johnston piece, but
Oh yeah.
it's just like dun, dun, dun. It's like almost like Black Christmas. It's like very eerie, but it's Christmassy, and you hear the ding 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 in the back. The music was sick. I will say that despite it being a complete misstep, I thought it was funny. Like they should have just had someone take Santa Claus out in the ring and send him packing to put a bow on the whole thing, pun intended. But like the fact that he was Saint Nick's twin brother from the South Pole.
So bad.
It's great.
Good stuff, but didn't really work. But
not at all.
Now I got to mention this to you. We haven't brought him up once, and I'm shocked because he's your favorite wrestler of all time. And he might be CM Punk's favorite wrestler of all time. And I know you know who I'm talking about here. How come we haven't mentioned Dean Visk yet? How come we haven't mentioned him?
Oh, my God. Yeah, the coffee man. Yeah, Dean Visk. The OVW hallway promo master. Yeah, when I was at my parents', I went through a couple boxes up in their attic when I visited Pennsylvania, and I just laughed when I saw like a whole bunch of like DVDs that had OVW, November 2005 or like whatever 2000 early 2006. And I just had all these memories of both Dean Hill, Dean Visk, Robbie Dauber. There was like so many like. There were so many characters in that era of OVW, and I loved them all. And I've got to go back and watch it. And hopefully, it holds up because, yeah, Dean Visk, the crazy man, just was on coffee and just a maniac. He's another unsung hero of wrestling that a lot of people might not know, but he ruled. I don't know how it might have worked on a major stage, but that's the thing about developmental too. It's you throw stuff against the wall, and for me to still remember fondly Dean Visk all these years later, it's 19 years later, for crying out loud.
Right. And by the way, he's still in awesome shape.
Good to hear. This is good. I and the Big Wick pizza. they have the commercial for the Big Wick. Go to the Big Wick, and I had a friend and we always wanted to just drive, not only to go to OVW show, but to get the Big Wick pizza that was advertised every week on OVW's programming. But yeah, the OVW, that's in a weird way. When I got to FCW, I probably had pretty good training from watching all that OVW in those days. I didn't really think about it at the time, but they knew how to run a good developmental television show for sure.
Now, FCW, obviously, when you were down there, what was like the main role? Like, obviously, you did some commentary, right? You did some interviewing.
Did very little commentary. Basically, I have like a sheet of like 3 different pages of all my duties, like heights and weights every other day, and we had to take photos. So I was the photographer. We get mid shots, far away shots. I was the technical director. I was the person who did roll call every day. I was the person who got Dusty's notes together and would talk to Dusty about the creative of everyone and take notes for the meetings. I would help Ricky Steamboat with performance reviews and things of that nature. God, I did a whole bunch, and I was constantly running. With live events, I just set up all the technical facets of a live event. And make sure we have the camera operator and the people in the right spot to sell the gimmicks and the popcorn and organize Let's Get Loud and make sure the timekeeper knew what he was doing and get with the ring announcer. And a lot of times the ring announcers were daisy fresh to wrestling. So you got to kind of teach them how to properly ring announce, or at least do the best job that you can teaching them how to properly ring announce. Because I'm not even saying I could properly ring announce, but I had to do it. So there was all of that. And, just being, Dusty's guy and coming up with stuff. And I was, in hindsight, I was way too wound tight. It was just so much pressure, so much anxiety, a lot of stress. It was not the days of like, hey, you're signed and you're going to get like 5 years out of this thing, so just have fun. It was just like every day, one foul up, you could be out of there. And that's the wrestler. That's everybody, man. So I wish I enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong. But in hindsight, I just wish if I turn back time, I'll share. I could just chill out a little bit and have a little more fun than I actually did. But no, there was a lot of responsibilities. And we'll work with Dr. Tom and Bill DeMott. They were both the heads while I was there. Tom left and Bill came in. So I kind of worked with them on a myriad of different things. And I'm probably forgetting a whole lot too. But it was fun, and then Byron Saxton, who's done amazing and is still doing great up there. He came in and helped me out. There's a guy named Chris Russo who works with Booker T's school down in Houston, Texas. And he still has his hand in wrestling, which I'm happy to see because he was really good. He would assist with me also. And we had a good little group. And wrestling, it's always like, oh, someone's going to knife you in the back and, everyone's after your gig. Like, never felt that way about Saxton or Chris Russo. They're both real nice guys. And we're all just kind of in it together trying to, keep the machine rolling, so to speak. Because it was that documentary they did on FCW is just excellent. Oh, I crack up so much when I watch it because they nailed it. It was very much like it is envisioned on that thing because it was just like the Wild West. Oh, Dusty, getting the promo days together. I have to record and produce every single promo, then upload it to a link, and then obviously title them and send them to all the different people. So it was that whole thing. We were still in those days putting things on DVD, so that was another process. I remember one time came in and like, yeah, by the way, all of our talent, all 60 of them, they need 60 DVDs of all these legends. Like, well, how are you going to do that? They're like, oh, well, we've got a 5 DVD burner here, and you're going to burn all of them. I'm like,
oh my God.
What? Like, you know how long it's going to take? Like, that's like, and then there it was always like, oh, we need something done by October 28th. So, like, if it was October 2nd, they'd be like, why isn't it done yet? It's like, well, the due date's the 28th. Well, you got to show that you're really into it, so it should be done by, like, the 5th. It's like, oh, my God, then why is there a effing due date? You know what I mean? So there was stuff like that. That was kind of crazy, but fun still. I can laugh at it now, but it was stressful back then. But, no, it was a trip. It was fun. I look on it now with a smile on my face. It's not like oh God, not that era.
Now, as we hit the wind down, head towards the finish, I could probably talk to you about wrestling all night, but you can't. You got to, respect your time. I could probably actually talk to you about wrestling probably forever if we really wanted to. But what is next? What do you got coming up down the pike?
Oh God, I'm pretty far removed from wrestling. I do the podcast, which I enjoy. So yeah, just check out the Center Stage Chronicles. And that is just the podcast you can find on X. I'm a real pro at doing these things where you're hyping things up. But yeah, I got that. And then I also on my Twitter or X put out some of these music videos through Loss and his wrestling playlist Substack, which I just advise everyone, if you're in wrestling, subscribe to the wrestling playlist Substack because it's just fun wrestling history, information, match reviews. You'll get a music video from me for every month of 1985. So if you don't want to go and watch, 126 matches that happened in, November 1985, just watch a condensed 4 minutes of it done to like, Oingo Boingo or Wham or, whoever was out those days, So that's kind of what's up, and that's about it.
Where can everybody find you, social media wise?
Oh, I think it's Jesus.
9-inch Naylor, NIN Naylor at NIN Naylor.